I'm Sarah Baxley, and welcome to Pinky the Bear. This is my Mystics, Metaphysics, and Mindfulness channel, and I'm here today with your astrology forecast for the week of October 7th, 2018. So the two upcoming themes for this week are 1, word vomit, and 2, coming to a head. All right, so before I break down the couple themes of this week, there's just a few things that I want to touch on really quickly because there is a lot. There are a lot of transits, there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of things that are coming up this upcoming week. So, just really quickly in recap from last week, we just had Venus station retrograde on October 5th, right? And, Venus, when I think of Venus retrograde, and this is something that only happens about once every year and a half, so about every 18 months, and she will stay retrograde for about 6 weeks, right? And when I think of Venus retrograde, I think of essentially Venus has packed her bags and she's gone on vacation. She's like, peace out, I'll be back in a few weeks and I'll see you around, right? And Venus essentially rules, Venus rules both Libra and Taurus, and Venus is, essentially like, a lot about love and beauty and harmony and the arts and relationship and also money and, all of these different kinds of things. So, with Venus retrograde going on, just things are, and I think I mentioned this in the video last week, just things are a little bit more, not that it's necessarily bad, but things are just a little bit more lackluster, right? Venus brings finesse, to things, and she brings grace, to things. So, with having Venus retrograde and appearing to go backwards in the sky, just things are going to kind of be a little bit more, there's a little bit of a bumpier road than there normally would be. And not, I want to emphasize, so it's not bad, it's just it's kind of lacking its finesse and sparkle, okay? So, and I think it's also important to know too is that Venus retrograde happens in the sign of Scorpio, which is going to go backwards back into her home in Libra. And so with Venus Scorpio, Scorpio is traditionally ruled by Mars, and with Venus and Scorpio, Scorpio is a water sign. It's very deep-seated in its emotions, right? So Venus and Scorpio is, it's a very like, heavy, raw, like emotionally raw place like for Venus to be, right? So with Venus retrograde here, it's a lot about kind of tapping into, a lot of like the raw and emotionally vulnerable places within us, right? Within ourselves, and the way that it affects our interpersonal relationships with others. And, it's also a lot about intimacy and emotional intimacy. So I really want for you over the next 6 weeks to really think about what emotional intimacy really means to you and the role that it plays in your daily life and your one-on-one relationships with others, because a lot of these themes are going to surface not only like in our own personal lives but also within society at large. So okay, so we got that out of the way. So then again, one last thing I want to say before we get into our themes for the week is that we also have a new moon, so a brand new chapter that's starting on Monday, October 8th, right? And this is kicking off a new chapter that's going to come to a head, right, and a culminating point at the full moon on October 24th, which is going to definitely be a major full moon that's going on there. And then it's going to slowly wrap its way up, I think, until our next new moon begins on November 7th. So that brings me into our first theme of the week, which is word vomit. Oh my gosh. I was like Googling idioms because I was trying to not say word vomit specifically, but okay, the other one that I came up with that was like just as close as like blurting it out, but it didn't sound as catchy to me as the word vomit. So, and the reason why I say this is we have Mercury come to oppose Uranus, and this is on Wednesday, October 10th. So Wednesday, October 10th, and Thursday, October 11th, as I mentioned in the video last week, it is a very dynamic 2 days, to say the least, right? This upcoming Wednesday and Thursday. And one of the components of that, there's many different transits and many different energies at play during this like sandwich 2-day period. But one of the really big ones is, back to this word vomit, is the Mercury coming to oppose Uranus. And this is something that only happens once a year, sometimes twice a year, depending upon the retrograde stations and all of that, but generally this is something that just happens once a year. So basically an opposition is when, two planets are at a 180 degrees away from one another, so completely opposite one another, right, on the zodiac wheel. And so we have Uranus and Taurus, and we have Mercury come to ingress into Scorpio and then come to oppose Uranus and Taurus. And basically, so Mercury is about communication, right? It's like about communication flow, thought process, all of that. Also, potentially social media, things like that. And then we have Uranus, which is kind of like Uranus is like a sudden rapid kind of change, or sudden rapid thing happening real quick. I think I've referenced it before as like ripping off a band-aid, but it's kind of like something, it's more of an unpredictable type of quality, right? When something kind of comes out of left field. So when we have Mercury coming to oppose Uranus right here, it's a lot of, word vomit can happen, right? And this is something, again, that we can see both like in our day-to-day life as well as within society at large. Sometimes something can maybe potentially kind of come out of left field or kind of like get blurted out around this time. We can kind of tend to be a little bit more reckless with our speech than we normally would when Mercury, and Uranus are in harmony with one another. So this is just something to keep in mind. That's our first theme of the week. So then that brings me to the second theme of the week, which is coming to a head, right? So essentially this sandwich on Wednesday, Thursday, between the 10th and 11th, there is just a lot going on. We have that Mercury-Uranus square, that opposition that happens. I can't remember if I said that was Tuesday, but it's Wednesday. And then we have, Venus come to square Mars. We have the Sun come to square Pluto. We have also the Moon conjunct Jupiter, so like kind of like this extension of like deep emotions and stuff like that kind of coming out. So there's just a lot of different things. So a lot of different kind of things are surfacing at that time. Again, that's kind of like when a lot of these transits, like the volume's gotten turned up, and we're just going to kind of see a little bit of an intensity fold, and that's going to be kind of like around, the first kind of culmination of things happen before the first quarter moon the following week. So so we have, kind of Venus come to square Mars, and Venus is, she's on vacation. She's on vacay. She's, kind of trying to take a break, but Venus kind of brings harmony and balance in, like diplomacy, right? And she's coming to make a 90-degree angle in square Mars, and Mars is really like a lot about like aggression and like assertion, right? So there's kind of like this dynamic happening that's like, at what point do we compromise, and at what point do we kind of push forward, right? And then we also have the Sun come to square Pluto, and with that, a lot of it is, as I mentioned last week, like Pluto is a lot about power and control, and the Sun is like our consciousness, collective consciousness, right? So there's this kind of square that's happening with a 90-degree angle that's happening with our consciousness, and with like, this theme of power and control and essentially manipulation that's also kind of happening, right? So these are all kind of things to kind of keep in mind, and also note that there are also going to be themes that are going to be resurfacing and kind of coming to an illumination, into a full kind of like understanding and culmination at the full moon that's on October 24th, because we also have the Venus right with the Sun on that day, in addition to an opposition from Uranus, so right with the moon. So anyway, these are just all kinds of things to keep in mind. I think that kind of covers everything for our week this week. So again, thank you so much for tuning in. If you would like to get a personal consultation, you can find me at pinkythebear.com. And yeah, and I'll see you next week. So thank you so much for tuning in, and leave a comment below. I'll see you around. Cheers.